Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. I am your host, Buford Terrell, and with me tonight, as usual, our co-host, Bandu Nair.
Good evening.
Good to have you with us again tonight.
Thanks.
And we have a rather varied program tonight, but before we get into things, I want to bring up something that's terribly off topic, but I think is important at this time of year. In Houston, at least, the new school year starts this coming Monday. And we are, of course, still in the throes of a Houston summertime. The front page of the Houston Chronicle sports section today had a long article about how high schools, colleges, and the professional teams cope with managing their athletes in practice and conditioning during these horrible summer days. For those of you who have children in middle school and high school, please take time to find and read this article, find out what some of the problems with young people trying to do physical exertion in this extremely hot weather are, and check and make sure that your sons and daughters' schools have adequate and proper heat management programs in place for their athletic programs. This is a very, very serious health issue. Each year there are across the country literally dozens of young athletes who suffer severe injury due to improper management of heat problems. So be sure and check and make sure that your children's schools know how to protect their young athletes in our horrible summer weather. And as I say, that's horribly off topic, but I felt like it was important enough to mention.
That's incredibly sincere and compassionate
Okay.
to mention anyways.
Do you have anything
I
for
have
us tonight?
something that's a little bit off topic, but it does affect, I guess, the modern activist. There's recently a White House manual was put out that details how to deal with protesters. It's an article in the Washington Post. It's today's Wednesday, August 22nd article. And basically, it's called the Presidential Advance Manual, dated October 2002. But it itemizes how to deal with dissenters in any public press conference or rally. Basically, any of the speeches that are upcoming for Bush to be campaigning for all the Republican candidates and for the 2008 elections. Now, when you read a little bit further into this, it seems just kind of funny at first that they have a manual on how to deal with protesters, but then it gets a little bit disturbing when the manual offers advanced staffers and volunteers that help set up the presidential events, their guidelines for actually assembling the crowds. And so they not only are searching people when they enter the door for objects or signs that they can, say supportive things on one side, and then they can switch for, negative campaigns kind of sneaking in. A lot of people do that. But they're searching people for their ideas now. Unless you completely agree with whatever, say a Republican person is speaking, unless you completely agree with their ideals and not just on the fence or, undecided, unless you completely agree, you're not allowed into certain areas and certain sections. So basically they're trying to deter any dissenters from entering in. Then it goes even further. If anyone who dissents or who asks a question that they don't want to deal with, they have rally squads, that are also appropriated in different sections in order to drown out anyone who has a question that they don't agree with. So for example, if someone were to ask a question negatively about the war in Iraq, what are we doing there, or ask about drug policy reform, or any of the dumb policies that we have in action right now, the rally squad demonstrators would drown them out by, chanting USA, USA, or something of that nature. And it's, then the manual adds in bold type, remember, avoid physical contact with the demonstrators, which is good, but most often the demonstrators want a physical confrontation, don't fall into their trap. That's not true. But the thing this oddly reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's been to any type of event or Democratic event, even here in Houston. I didn't know that they went to local campaigns, but the LaRouche group. And you laugh when I say LaRouche, because Lyndon LaRouche is the perennial presidential candidate. He has run every time under some kind of ticket or platform for president. And he's got, certain nicknames attached with his name and everything that indicate what type of politician he is. He's anywhere ranging from bankruptcy, tax evasion, mail fraud, to the least of it, to the worst of it being a complete anti-Semite and proud of it, essentially. But there, I was at the New Hampshire primaries in 2000 or something like that for a Students for Sensible Drug Policy conference. And the LaRouche followers, and it's almost cultish in their followers.
I would say it is cultish.
Yeah, it's very cultish, and that's why I saw some people in Houston. But in that New Hampshire primaries, they were basically, not without a manual, but they were employing these same tactics. Intimidation, they would drown out anyone who would try to ask a drug policy reform question to the presidential candidates. They would basically intimidate and try to get as many people gathered around one person and try to intimidate them so that they wouldn't ask a question. And I'm like, is the Bush regime really employing these LaRouche tactics inadvertently? And is that what we've come to?
These tactics go way, 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 way back before LaRouche.
Right.
Many of them come out of Germany in the early 1930s. But it's funny you brought this up because a lawsuit was finally settled this week that sprang from the 2002 campaign. Mm-hmm. During the 2002 campaign, George Bush held an outdoor rally on the grounds of the state capitol. I believe it was in West Virginia, but
right.
at one of the states. Two people showed up on the state capitol grounds at the Bush rally wearing homemade T-shirts on the front of which was the word Bush surrounded by a red circle with a diagonal line through
right.
it and some statement about his policies on the back. This couple was immediately arrested, hauled off by the police. They were held for several hours while the police were trying to figure out something to charge them with. They were finally charged with criminal trespass and arrested. The cases were quickly dismissed when, all of a sudden, some prosecutor realized that you can't arrest a citizen for being on the Capitol grounds on a trespassing charge.
Right.
This couple sued the U.S. government for violation of civil rights. That lawsuit was settled this week for a rather substantial sum, in a case not involving $80,000. And interestingly enough, in the course of the settlement, the Bush administration tried to force a gag order into the settlement so that they couldn't even talk about it.
Oh, wow.
But the plaintiffs resisted. So we know he was using those tactics in 2000.
Yeah.
We can remember the 2004 Republican convention in New York City, where they tried to establish a so-called free speech area.
Right.
Literally blocks away from the convention site and behind chain link fences.
Exactly.
And if you've noticed that for several years now, anytime Bush has given a speech, he has not made a public appearance. He has always spoken inside some sort of closely controlled private venue.
Right, or ticketed
where they
event.
can keep out any kind of outsiders. Usually it's been military bases. But
right.
This regime has probably been more detrimental to the free speech rights of American citizens than any, I guess, since at least the Wilson regime with its horrible anti-sedition and censorship arrest during the First World War. I mean, it's just outrageous the way this administration has run roughshod over the First Amendment.
Right. Hopefully we won't be backtracking afterwards of all the First Amendment rights have been taken from us, but the free speech block Yeah, that's what's in the manual as well. There's actually a free speech zone that people are supposed to be herded to, basically.
No, and the
get
whole
out of
idea
limelight.
behind those is to make sure that they are far out of sight of any TV camera,
Right.
and so far away that they can't be heard or probably even found by roaming even press reporters.
Right.
And I might also add, with the outrageous invasions of free speech and securities against unreasonable searches that have taken place with this administration's totally unconstitutional wiretapping and eavesdropping over international phone calls and international emails. Since they're mining these calls to look for so-called terrorists, I can't help but wonder what would happen to their operations if every overseas phone call had some line in it like, that movie I saw last night was a real bomb. Or I hope Grandpa doesn't hijack the conversation this Thanksgiving like he did last year. Or that linebacker goes after quarterbacks like he's on a jihad. I mean, if they want to eavesdrop, let's give them something to hear.
Exactly. People just start including that in everyday conversation
Yeah.
to try to give them a run for their money.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, something that certainly wasn't repressed in their freedom of speech, and it was actually called the Austin Freedom Fest, went on last weekend.
Okay, were you there?
I was not.
Okay.
I was not, unfortunately. Some members of our crew here were,
Yes.
and got some excellent video footage, and they were lucky enough to be there. It was sponsored by Marijuana Policy Project, or in benefit of Marijuana Policy Project by Willie Nelson.
Yeah.
And it was at the Backyard in Austin. Excellent venue. We actually have a clip here of Valerie Corral from the Women and Men's Alliance. And we've got a 5-minute clip, so let's go ahead and roll that.
Okay, that sounds good. So
yeah.
let's take ourselves to Austin and see what it's all about.
Well, I have to say, I'm so happy to be in Austin. It's my first trip here, and you have an oasis amidst some of the madness in this universe. And I thank you very much for your hospitality and your beautiful paradise. So, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we do out in Santa Cruz. We have a medical marijuana collective run by patients, mostly terminally ill patients. 190 of our members have died in 14 years since our inception. Our collective grew after an arrest when my husband Mike and I were arrested for growing marijuana. I've used it for 30 years for epilepsy, and we challenged the law, and we won. Then we were arrested again. Yeah, well that didn't stop the cops, right? Because sometimes they're a little vindictive. However, we were arrested again, and we again challenged the law. And what grew out of that in 1993 was a collective of patients, people coming together, people who are sick, making community, like you do here in Austin, making community. And out of community grows all that is great. Because really, what changes this nation and what changes all nations are the people. It's you. It never comes from the top down. All goodness, all greatness comes from the bottom up, from the people up. That is what government is. We are the government. They just can't hear us those 1,000 miles away in D.C. So we started this collective of patients, and in 2002 we were arrested by the DEA on a Thursday. On a Tuesday we were back from our garden, what was left of it, giving away the pot that we had hidden away and stored away. We hadn't missed a meeting since the DEA came to raid us. Why is that? It's because of people like you. Because in community, everything grows. Strength, nourishment, and easing one another into the process that we all have to face, which is our own death. So we built a little hospice, and what we do is we carry each other, all the things, like we pick up each other's kids from the doctor or take them to school, whatever it is that we need, but we also hold hands, and we stay with one another during the process of dying. and we keep people at home where they want to be. Sometimes their own families are out trying to pay the mortgage. So what we do is we stay with each other. And I recommend that everybody has the same possible ability that we do by joining together. It's about unity. It's about coming together and making a community and working together, even in the face of what seems dark and what seems negative and what seems impossible. It's not. The only thing that makes something impossible is that it hasn't been done yet. So if you come together in this beautiful oasis that you call Awesome Austin, you do it too. That's what this Freedom Fest is about. It's about social change, about creating social policy, and getting out the vote. If you're not registered, you should be registered, and making your community everything that you possibly can to overthrow this regime and create a revolution. A revolution is in your mind. It begins here, in your heart, begins in your head, and it reaches across the nation, and it touches other nations. We are powerful, every one of us. And it isn't in only growing a beautiful garden of marijuana, which is what we do. My husband Mike is the agricultural genius. Thank you very much. And that also keeps our patients going. So sometimes you have to sneak it. Sometimes you can do it in the open. We're lucky enough to be able to do it in Santa Cruz. Our city and our county joined us in suing the federal government. And we went back to, I know, it was pretty fantastic. On July 12th, I went to Congress and was able to give the first testimony on medical marijuana that Congress has ever heard. Yeah, it was amazing to be invited before Congress. I didn't wear this suit, mind you. However, it was remarkable because it was the first time that they'd asked somebody to speak about medical marijuana, but not only the DEA. And we talked to the DEA and we asked them to please to hear us and to hear our words, that we're not enemies, that it's all human being looking at another human being. We are not separate. We are equal. That's the whole egalitarian principle upon which this nation was founded, our equality. So celebrate our equality, celebrate our freedom, join the revolution. You are the revolution. It's right in here. Kick ass, Austin. Thank you very much.
That was Valerie Corral from the Women and Men's Alliance. She's an excellent speaker. They are one of the biggest dispensaries, biggest and probably first, I guess. I don't know about biggest, but she has an excellent, I think she just briefly kind of mentioned it and was talking about social change, and I really agree with that, but she has one of the best outlooks on coping with and dealing with death, and, of course, she mentioned how many members that they had lost. They are constantly raided by the DEA. Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous. You want to look for a dispensary that's been raided, just Google them.
Well, and to me, this has been one of the major problems with the medical marijuana movement all along, is that while operating at the local and state level is a great way to build grassroots change, and while it has had some measure of relief for a lot of patients, it has not gotten the DEA out of the game, and if anything, has made them much, much more virulent and aggressive in their pursuit. If you follow what's been happening in California over the last few years, with the kinds of raids they have been conducting on dispensaries of every sort, with their retrial of Ed Rosenthal, which something ultimately, and by ultimately I mean pretty quickly, is going to have to be done to directly move the DEA out of the picture.
Right. Well, you're right. It's the last avenue that we have, especially in California, between state and local. And that's a valid point. Looks like we have a caller. I believe it's Dean. I don't want to say for sure. Hello. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Hi, this is Dean Becker.
Hi, Dean. Good evening.
Good evening. I admit that I'm on a cable system here that doesn't carry your show, so I'm not sure what's been discussed thus far. I have a couple of things I'd like to discuss, though.
Okay, we look forward to it.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Now, first up, I was astounded, almost cried when I saw this piece came out in the Washington Post this past Sunday, The Lost War, written by Misha Glenny. Basically, I'll read from it a bit. We've spent 36 years and billions of dollars fighting it, but the drug trade keeps growing. And basically, it focuses on the situation in Afghanistan, where some 3 million Afghanis are now growing opium, where they're selling it to middlemen, and it's being taxed by the Taliban. It's being distributed sometimes by high officials within the Afghan government, and how it's backfiring in so many ways. It's providing the money that our enemies need to purchase the weapons with which to kill our soldiers. And it had a response today from Mr. Robert Weiner, former official with the Office of National Drug Control Policy. If I recall right, he said something to the effect that it is necessary that we continue this drug prohibition. He didn't talk about this situation at all, the Lost War, where we're funding the Taliban. He talked about how they're doing a good and noble thing, I suppose. On the same day, or within the same couple of days, we had another article published in the Washington Times, authored by Professor Arnold Trebach. He's the author of a great new book, by the way, Fatal Distraction, The War on Drugs in the Age of Islamic Terror. And he talks about the situation, how we're supporting the same policy, pretty much, talking about we're allowing the gangs in Mexico to prosper, how because of our policy of drug prohibition, they are able to convert relatively worthless plants into substances often worth more ounce for ounce than golds or diamonds. And then, and Arnold, by the way, will be my guest on this week's Cultural Baggage Radio program. On this week's Century of Late Lies program, our guest will be Ethan Nadelman, and he had two articles published in the last few days. The Los Angeles Times, talking about aid that won't help Mexico, pretty much the same thing, how we're shooting ourselves in the foot, draining our treasury and doing nothing to solve this problem.
We're doing more than shooting ourselves in the foot in a metaphorical sense. We've also escalated a violent border into an out-and-out war, so that we are also literally shooting ourselves in much more vulnerable spot than the feet.
I couldn't agree more, Buford. You know, and the whole point of it is that these people in positions of power, who do you go talk to when you want to find out what we should do? Well, you talk to the DA or the police chief or even a politician, and they all have vested interest in this, if for no other reason the fact that to back down now makes them look foolish for their support in the past. And the fourth one, Ethan's going to be on my show, and we're going to be talking more about this piece. It's coming out in the September-October issue of the magazine Foreign Policy, and his article, Why It's Time to Legalize Drugs. And again, we have other things we can do with our money. We have invested some $11 trillion, by my estimates, into this drug war. $1 trillion to the cops and law enforcement, and $10 trillion that we've handed over to the terrorists, the dangerous cartels, and the violent criminals, the black market selling drugs to our children. It's time to pull our heads out. It's time to take a good look at what we're really up to here, and to make some changes. I want to invite folks to tune in to my radio shows if they would this week. I think they're going to be very educational. That's on KPFT Radio. That's 90.1 FM, Houston, 89.5 in Galveston. The Century of Lies show is at 1 p.m. on Friday. That will feature Mr. Ethan Nadelman. And the 7 o'clock show, 7 p.m., is Cultural Baggage, and that will feature Professor Arnold Trebach. Folks want to learn more about what we're doing. We have hundreds of shows available online at drugtruth.net.
Okay, thank you, Dean. It's always good to hear from you, and sounds like you've got some exciting shows coming up.
Thank you, Buford. It's always a pleasure to speak to your audience.
And speaking to our audience, remember we do have phone lines open, so if you want to contribute to the show with a comment or a question, please feel free to join us here. I've got some comments about a couple of the things Dean was saying.
Okay.
And, as usual, these are things that a lot of people have heard me say before, but they bear repeating. And the first is that people like the Taliban aren't selling heroin because they like drugs or because they want to be drug pushers or because they're trying to hook American kids. They sell drugs for the same reason that Willie Sutton once claimed he robbed banks, because that's where the money is. Joseph Stalin, while he was building up to the revolution in Russia, supported his terrorist gang literally by robbing banks. So yes, we can expect to find the Taliban going where the money is. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, can you turn your television down?
I'm sorry, I'm turning down right now.
Okay.
Hey, ma'am, I just have a question. The gentleman's name on the right-hand side?
Yes.
What is your name, sir?
Buford Terrell.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
I was just wondering, we have a conversation going on about drugs, crimes, and politics, and you are at Michael's International like almost every other day, aren't you?
Well, why not?
What's that?
Why not?
I was just wondering, because I kind of find it kind of hypocritical that, you know, you're surrounded by drugs, crime, and politics at a titty bar every day. That's all I was wondering.
Okay. I might add that free speech, the First Amendment, also protects sexual expression as well. My choice of a neighborhood bar, I think, is a personal matter. Whether or not I do anything in a place like Michael's other than have a drink, I think is a matter that's up to me. Now, what relationship that has to whether or not our drug laws are totally insane also is a question I have trouble seeing. But
Exactly, and like you said, the bank robber said, that's a veritable business. It's an establishment. Women work there. That's where the money's at. So,
but going back to where the money's at, heroin is worth millions of dollars, not because it's heroin, but because it's illegal. When heroin was legal, the Bear Company made both heroin and aspirin and sold them at exactly the same price. Right now, you can buy cocaine on the streets of cities in Colombia at about $2 a gram. And it's up to about $100 a gram in the United States. If we compare marijuana, which is a very easily grown plant, about $100 an ounce for more common varieties here in this country now. Compare that to other similar agricultural crops. Tea, I have priced at 99 cents for a 1 ounce box. Coffee runs about 35 cents an ounce. Even cigarettes, including the tax, are still only about $5 an ounce, which is one package. All of the rest of that price is due to the prohibition laws. And that's what attracts the bad guys. Whether they're the Taliban, whether they're the narco-traficantes in Colombia, whether they're the Mexican cartels, they don't care about the drugs, they're after the money.
right.
Pull the price support out and they go away.
Exactly. I think you made an extremely valid point when it's just, we're not trying to be drug pushers or anything. Because we have these insane laws, in fact, we're essentially funding them. We're essentially giving them an income. And it looks like we have another caller. Hopefully this is a little bit screened. Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Yes, hello.
I wanted to expand on what Buford was talking about when you talked about agricultural commodities. My father owned farmland, and this is, of course, several years ago, and you'd have to index a little bit for inflation. But he was talking at one time how the farmers who had rented his land were very, very upbeat that year because they were going to get $8 for every 100 pounds of sorghum they harvested. Now, you can contrast that to marijuana, which is easily $100 a pound harvested. You're getting to the point of 1 to the times 10 to the 5th power.
Yeah.
It's just 10,000% more, whatever. It's just an amazing variation on what a commodity should be and what it isn't. And when you consider that marijuana is, like you say, a fast-growing, disease-resistant, rugged plant.
And generally easily growable.
It's literally a bush covered with $20 bills.
Yes.
And you say, and there are bureaucrats and politicians and cops that say, well, we're going to fight this.
Well, I think
Anybody going to fight something like that, you know?
Thank you. Go ahead.
that was an excellent point, and I think that's why Kentucky farmers and just farmers in the Midwest in general are fighting so hard for hemp. It's why can we import all of the products that are produced from hemp, such as clothing, food, seeds, whatever, or not seeds, but basically for granola or whatever.
Several
And they can't
studies
grow
have shown that marijuana is now probably at least the 4th largest cash crop in this country, and in some states, including Kentucky, it's the largest cash crop. But that's an artificial price created by the drug laws. If you want to get rid of drug dealers, if you want to get rid of drug crime, the thing to do is remove the prohibition laws. In 1930, the biggest beer seller in the United States was Al Capone. And he was selling beer for about 10 times what it sold for 3 years later, because in 1933, prohibition was repealed, and sure enough, Al Capone was soon replaced with Anheuser-Busch and Miller's. Now, did that solve problems with drunk driving and with underage drinkers? No. We've still got those. And if we were to legalize drugs, would we still have problems with abusive users and underage users? Yes, but we've got them now. One of the things I've noticed is that in 1937, when we passed the first federal marijuana law, marijuana was a practically unknown thing. And now it's almost universal. Apparently the way to make drugs thrive in a culture is to make them illegal. They're telling me it's time for a break, so we'll be back in a minute or so.
Actually, I think at this break, let me give a brief introduction. We have Rob Kampia. Yeah, and he was also speaking at the Austin Freedom Fest. The lighting's a little bit dark, but bear with us. And notice what he says about the recent bill that was passed, but go ahead, Steve.
There is an organization, a coalition of conservative groups that were lobbying in the Texas legislature here in Austin to try to change the law so that people who are caught with small amounts of marijuana, I know small in the north might be an eighth of an ounce, small in Texas is a couple ounces. People who are caught with a couple ounces of marijuana or who are busted for other misdemeanors. We were trying to fund this movement to try to change the laws in Texas so that the police would no longer have to arrest you for that marijuana and that they could, in fact, give you a ticket instead, just like a speeding ticket. That law passed this spring. So people who are unfortunate enough to run into the police if they have an ounce or two of marijuana are now not in jeopardy, as much jeopardy of getting arrested and taken down to the station. as they were at the beginning of this legislative session. So I think that's something that we can all celebrate here in Texas. And there are victories across the country. I'm just going to rattle off a few. If you happen to be from one of the states I list off, you should scream at the top of your lungs. So over the last 12 years, the marijuana policy reform movement and my organization, the Marijuana Policy Project, has helped in this. We've legalized medical marijuana in 12 states in 12 years as a movement. And we're going to take it to the next level. Our legislation in New York State. Anyone from New York here? Yeah. A couple? I can't believe it. A couple? Our medical marijuana bill in New York is getting close to passing in Albany. If I had to bet money, and I am betting money, I think it's going to pass in the next couple months. New York State might become the 13th state where medical marijuana is legal. Furthermore, my organization, the Marijuana Policy Project, is putting initiatives on the ballot in Arizona and Michigan. And these two questions are going to be on the ballot in November of next year. That's just a little bit more than a year from now. If we pass those two initiatives, and I think we will, because the polling shows that we're looking real good, those states could be the 14th and the 15th states to legalize medical marijuana. Now let's talk about the broader issue, the non-medical uses of marijuana. We split our time 50-50 between the two. We're launching a campaign in just a couple weeks in Massachusetts. Is there anyone here from Massachusetts? A few. A gaggle. We are launching an initiative in Massachusetts that if someone is caught with under an ounce of marijuana for any use, medical, recreational, spiritual, otherwise confused reasons, the police will no longer be allowed to arrest you and put you in jail. In Massachusetts, if this initiative passes, you will be given a ticket, like a speeding ticket, and you can pay that through the mail, just like you would a speeding ticket. No arrest, no jail, no lawyers, no courtroom. And just one more thing about the progress we're making across the country. In Congress, every summer there's a vote on medical marijuana legislation that a whole host of organizations participate in to try to pass. Every year it's inched up a bit. The vote that just occurred a couple weeks ago didn't go as well as we hoped, but we still set a new record. So on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, 165 members of the House voted to forbid the Justice Department and the DEA from spending your money, taxpayer money, to go after medical marijuana patients in the states where it's legal. We lost the vote, but our vote's getting higher every year. We only need 218 votes to pass. We got 165 votes. We're getting closer and closer every year. I predict that within 3 years, we're going to be able to move the legislation all the way through Congress so that the feds leave the states alone if they choose to legalize medical marijuana.
Okay, the Texas statute that Rob was talking about was House Bill 2391, which goes into effect in another week on the 1st of September. Mm-hmm. And what this bill does is allow counties and cities to follow a certain process that would allow, in the case of nonviolent Class A and Class B misdemeanors, which, as far as we're concerned, primarily would be possession of marijuana up to 2 ounces. Mm-hmm. But if the procedures were followed and the mechanism put in place at the county level, then the police, when they stop or find someone possessing marijuana, instead of arresting them, taking them to jail, and then having them appear immediately or within a day in front of a judge, would give them a citation, like a traffic ticket, with a date for them to appear in front of court. and the police would then file a written report with the court about the facts of the offense. So in effect, the process would be the same as a traffic ticket, although the ultimate result of the trial, if it goes to trial, could still be up to 6 months for an ounce or up to a year for 2 years. But more and more across Texas, we find cities and counties using probation or diversionary schemes for these cases. Now, these require active procedures on the part of local government to go into place. So I firmly recommend that people call their attention of their county commissioners and county judges to this law and point out to them that avoiding the booking procedure and avoiding holding people in pretrial detention on marijuana arrest would cut down greatly on jail overcrowding and would delay having to expand jails like they're all talking about doing. Likewise, point it out to your mayors and city councilmen. Point out to them that a citation takes about 30 minutes of an officer's time, whereas an arrest and booking takes about 3 hours. That means that each 4 marijuana possession arrests avoided would amount to the equivalent of an additional full-time officer doing an 8-hour patrol shift. And for cities like Houston, worried about the size of the police force, it wouldn't take many of those additional patrol days to make a real difference. I think we have another caller.
Yeah. Hi, caller. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
What I want to know is, y'all talking about drugs, right?
Drugs, crime, and politics.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of drugs in the school?
Okay, let me answer that. No. Period. There never has been, and there never will be. If you go back and look at the 2 surveys that the federal government has sponsored for over 30 years now, both dating to the early 1970s, the Monitoring the Future, Profiling the Future Project and the SAMHSA Household Survey, they continually show that any kind of drug involvement in school-age children is in the very, very low percentage figures, and the number that involve any kind of regular abusive use or the possibility of any kind of dependency are in the low single-digit figures. There's a lot of hysteria about drugs in school, but there's not really any drugs in school.
Well, also the University of Michigan Monitoring the Future study.
Well, that's funded by the federal government, yes.
And it shows that in schools that have student drug testing, etc., there is no significant decrease in use. If there were drug use, or if there were a significant amount of drug use in schools, there's got to be a better way than mandating student drug testing.
And that's the funny thing.
We just, we need a better, smarter approach than DARE. That's also been proven, government funded or privately funded, that it doesn't work. So Marsha Rosenbaum is a PhD in psychology or something. She has an excellent safety-based, honesty-based, reality approach to talking about drugs. We have a caller right now, so welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
I guess hello.
Yeah. So,
please try again. Sometimes we can't handle the buttons well. I wanted to say one other thing here since you brought up drug testing. The schools that are doing drug testing, and those are all funded by federal grants, almost universally show less than 1% positive tests. Now, we've got a caller.
Oh, okay, great. Let's see. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Thanks, Joe. There have been a number of reports
please turn down your TV.
There has been one about drugs in school. It seems to me that this is how our youth is learning Business 101. And though it's not all bad, I mean, kids do need to learn economics. Isn't this the wrong material to teach this subject with?
I think maybe you're suggesting that school kids are becoming drug entrepreneurs. Once again, I think that's more myth than fact. Now, kids do share drugs. Kids usually get drugs from older friends, brothers and sisters. They rarely deal directly with drug dealers themselves.
I don't know so much about that. I mean, this is kind of a weird target audience. I think what the caller was trying to say was that, to our effect, that we're teaching them Drugs 101 with Darren, not teaching them, an actual reality-based approach. Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
All right, how y'all doing today?
Good. Do you have a question for us or a comment?
Yeah, like I said, it's a nice show you've gone. Hey, but how do y'all feel about gay marriages?
Okay, well, thanks for calling. Actually, did you know that Spain was the 4th nation to legalize and put it, I'm not sure if they put it in their constitution, I guess they had to, but gay marriages.
And in Mexico City, they're recognizing. And the ironic thing is here that we're finding heavily Catholic countries moving ahead of the United States.
Right, Spain.
And, frankly, it doesn't matter how I feel about gay marriages. If we want to know what matters, let's ask gay people how they feel about gay marriages. It's their business.
Right. And you say gay people, but the president or whomever of Spain has a great speech, and then he says, brings it back home, and he says, these aren't, when you say gay people, it's not someone just out there. These are your neighbors, your coworkers. And so it's really, it brings a humanity to the
as one
face of the
preacher
issue.
in the Dallas area found out to his great amazement and embarrassment last week, members of your congregation.
Exactly. We have another caller. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Thank you. This is Tony King. First, I'd like to say hi to you, Bender, and I'd like to say hi to Buford. Mr. Charles, Tony King. You did an interview with me years ago.
Yes.
And Bender, I've been on your show once.
Yes, you have. Thanks for
I'd
calling.
like to make
How
a
are you?
comment. I'd like to get back to the deal about people being incarcerated for misdemeanor offenses of marijuana. I think Buford's right on point as far as the direction, the HPD and Harris County Sheriff's Department, they both need to go that direction to writing citations instead of locking people up. Because, yeah, it's true. They take about 5,000 people every weekend in Harris County Jail between Friday and Sunday. And most of that's between Friday and Saturday. And it takes between 2 to 3 days to get to a bed when you go there. And then when you go see the judge, most of the time, if you've been there more than 5 days, they're going to give you time served.
Oh, wow.
So that gives Harris County a chance to make $1,000.
Yeah.
And plus, you're probably going to make commissary. Some things are going to happen. It keeps their revenue going, and it interrupts everyone's life that's involved. Even not just the person, but the people that are attached to them.
Exactly.
And I think that's one thing that, people need to realize, that things are wrong with the system because the system it locks all of us up for little things.
Well, the thing that you just described is kind of an in-life reality of the revolving door system. If you've been there for more than 5 days, well, it takes just that amount of time to process it. That's horrible, but you've been an informative guest in the past, and I just want to thank you again for calling in, Tony.
Sure. It's great. I love to watch the show every week. I don't think I miss it unless I have to work. So, but I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate y'all's efforts.
Great.
I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And he brings it up. I want to bring it up again. Right now, the Harris County Commissioner's Court is talking about a $200 million bond issue for jail expansion.
Right.
They also have been unable to arrange full-time staffing for the jail for many, many years now. It looks to me like if they can find a way to cut down on the number of people they're locking up, rather than simply building more big jails that they don't have people to staff, we'd all be better off.
Right, and we've had a couple of guests. That was Tony King. He was actually an inside reporter for Dean Becker for many radio programs. He was on this show. And we've had an actual prison guard come on saying that they just don't have enough people. They don't have enough resources. People can get lost in this, literally lost in the system. Their files lost for weeks. And that's just kind of the unfortunate things that we have to deal with because of this insane system. So let's think about that while we take a break. And we've got a 1-minute clip here.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. More than 500,000 Americans are arrested each year for smoking pot. These are ordinary citizens like you and me, whose lives and careers are being needlessly destroyed. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Okay, there were two other news stories that have surfaced this week that I want to call the viewers' attention to. The first was a story about some women who they were calling fast metabolizers or fast processors. And when they took codeine cough medicine, it showed up as morphine in their nursing babies and was causing overdose symptoms in the babies. The other is a story that of the 5 leading painkillers, all of them opiates, the rate of use through prescription over the last decade had increased 90%. These included Oxycontin, Vicodin, morphine, and I forget what the others were. They were all. Now, the secret is all of these drugs, when they're in the body, are metabolized into morphine, and it's the morphine that has the effect we're looking for when we take the medicine. Likewise, heroin, when it's put in the body, reverts back to plain old morphine. Now, it seems silly to me to have heroin on one side of the never never fence and all of these others on the legal side. We would be much better off about removing that fence and looking at the way we use opiates in general, realizing they're largely beneficial, but that some people do use them abusively, and a very, very few people do become dependent on them. But this idea of putting this artificial fence between morphine and heroin is just more than silly, it's insane. Do we have another caller?
We do. We have another caller. So, hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Yes, I have a question that's been...
Wait, before you start, can you turn down your television, please?
Okay. Is this good?
Yeah, we can hear you a lot better now.
Okay, can you tell me the difference between crack and cocaine?
Okay, that I can do.
Thank you.
There is no difference between crack and cocaine. Crack is cocaine. The difference is crack is cocaine hydrochloride, to use the technical term, that has been boiled with baking soda to get rid of the acid component in it. What this means is that crack can be smoked instead of having to be either inhaled through the nose or injected. Right. Since it can be smoked, it has a much quicker effect. It also wears off more quickly. And because it can be smoked rather than injected, a much, much smaller dose can have some effect. The result is that crack cocaine can be sold in $4 or $5 usable amounts, whereas powder cocaine still $25 to $50 for usable. But they're both just cocaine.
Right.
So
it looks like we have another caller.
Okay.
Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
How you doing?
Good, how are you? Can you turn down your television, please?
I have one.
Okay, I think he's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me good?
Yes. Go ahead, and you have a question or comment?
Yeah. I just want to let you know,
I don't know.
Okay.
They can't even speak clearly. But going back to, what was it you were talking about before the callers?
The fact that the recognitions of the effects we get from using legitimate painkillers in legitimate ways, like codeine, Vicodin,
Right.
Oxycontin.
And I wonder if there is going to be, I mean, there hasn't, ever since Rush Limbaugh got on his, came out with his OxyContin, his little OxyContin kick and, outed himself as a huge hypocrite, there hasn't been any huge stories like that about how basically essentially the same drug. They're both just as addictive. Just one is, doesn't have this invisible fence around it. It is legal and it is prescribed. I wonder if there is going to be any type of legislation or a huge media outbreak of how prescription pills are over-abused. And even so, we all know, I don't know the exact statistics, but prescription pills kill more people than...
Yeah, but I think the realization that we need to come to is not that there are good drugs and bad drugs.
Mm-hmm.
There are drugs that may have beneficial uses or harmful uses, and that there are people who, for one reason or another, either use them wisely or use them in an abusive fashion. And we have to concentrate, whatever we're going to do, on the users, not the drugs.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's definitely a public health issue as opposed to a criminal issue, which is something...
A public health or a social issue. So
right.
Yeah, but it's not a matter of criminal law.
Right.
And frankly, if you think about it, and if you go back as far as the Heroin Exclusion Acts and the Heroin Anti-Export Acts of the middle 1920s, the Marijuana Tax Act, when and why in the world did we ever let policemen decide medical policy and what amounts to the treatment of disease or the practice of medicine? I mean,
it's when we're letting legislators now decide our educational policy. It's not working there either. We actually have about 2.5 minutes left. Did you have an editorial wrap-up?
I've got a brief statement I want to make tonight, and it concerns my favorite whipping boys, elected officials. And I think probably I need to stress over and over again that your elected critters are just like your dogs. If you work hard enough at it, you can train them. It may take a choke chain occasionally. Some of them are so bad you just got to get rid of them. But if we look at the district attorney in San Antonio, who has announced that, well, she doesn't think the needle exchange bill is effective because no one bothered to remove the penalty clause from the drug paraphernalia statute. I'm sorry, lady. Statutory interpretation involves finding out the legislative intent. It's not a question of playing Simon Says to see if a magical word's there. You're elected to carry out the will of the people. The will of the people there is clear. This week, Houston's own favorite man in the DA's chair, Chuck Rosenthal, harumphed his way into saying, well, he just wasn't going to prosecute any misdemeanor cases that were not started with an arrest. Okay, Chuck, so be it. If we don't arrest for marijuana and you don't prosecute, then we've decriminalized. Listen to the will of the people. That's your job. And that's my job for tonight. Thank you for watching. Keep your cards and the letters rolling into those elected critters of yours.
Right. Cool.
The present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is illicit